Long ago, in 1968, there was a science fiction movie with apes in it that was a massive success. This film delved deep into human psychology and made us question our own reality. The film I am talking about is, of course, Planet of the Apes. Now, I don't need to be the first to tell you how good this movie is, but maybe I might be the first to tell you this. Rod Serling wrote it. That Rod Serling, from The Twilight Zone. It's clear that his time writing science fiction mysteries and shocking twists paid off, as this could potentially be his best one. It is sad though, because it is the only one penned by him, which speaks to the quality of the following movies. The first scene that calls out to me is when the apes pose with a dead human. It's just an instant subversion that I think says a lot about the film within itself. What I took from this movie is it is about man's failures. Man's failure to be kind to our planet and our animals. The fact that humans and animals are flipped, having them in cages and not being able to speak, was actually the shock I think a lot of people needed to realize what we as humans are doing wrong. The evil breeding tactics and downright lobotomy were deplorable, but that served the point of the story. The idea we need a movie like this that puts ourselves in their place in order to get that message across says a lot about humanity and how we treat our animals. I think as you keep watching, one thing you'll notice is this movie isn't very subtle. At all. Like, come on, they had the orangutans doing hear, speak, and say no evil from the Japanese proverb. This obviously speaks to the philosophical aspect, which is a running theme throughout. The orangutans, specifically Dr. Zayas, are devoted to their religion in a fanatical way. What you believe in is up to you, but I can assure you people like this exist, and we ignore it because it's commonplace. The more thoughtful aspect is one part, but obviously this is a science fiction movie, so we have to talk about that too. The premise itself is quite silly, and I have a feeling if you saw this poster without any background knowledge, you would probably laugh. But this divide and similarity between past humans and the apes of the future is something that stuns both sides. It's definitely implied Taylor thinks he's in a different dimension or a different planet, which was an interesting idea. Of course, with the time travel, we see our first sign of civilization with the doll scene. It is chilling as well, since the doll speaks unlike the rest of the humans, and the audience realizes there's a deeper connection there. I think if apes suddenly began to talk, we would do the exact same thing, and it's clearly a warning to understand what you fear before jumping to rash decisions. All the sets are hand-built, so much of the budget went into that and makeup. For my assumption, it seems like that was good in the long run because the story was interesting and gripping enough through the writing instead of action. If you watch it, you'll see what I mean. Another concept to understand is while apes in this movie, even though they are representative of humans, are just doing what they've been taught by their ancestors, so it's hard to see who is really wrong or who doesn't want to go against this societal structure they're so used to. So even though Taylor is a victim in this story, it's possible he stood idly by while the same thing was done back on Earth. It's part of his instinct against unknown nature and also what he's learned from other humans, just like the apes. That's why Dr. Cornelius and Zira are a breath of fresh air in this story, being the ones to finally do what they believe is right, even if it means risking their own heads and committing treason to do it. Without them, the story would have an even more bitter ending, which I guess we should talk about. If you didn't know, and please watch the movie if you don't, please. Trust me, I wish I didn't get this spoiled beforehand. They were on Earth the entire time, that's right. He wasn't sent to another planet or a universe, but merely a world the humans themselves destroyed. It's a really dark note, but it encapsulates the story in a really deep, shocking, and touching way, which is why I think it stood the test of time. You'd think after that picture-perfect ending they would leave it alone to become a beloved classic with an untainted theatrical story. Wrong. This is where things get very, very weird. In Hollywood, anything that is successful needs to be milked to the brim with endless merchandising and spin-offs to make more money, and if you're thinking, they wouldn't do that, why would they ruin such a good movie? You are still wrong! They watered it down with merchandise and later on cartoons, and a 14-episode series with an album released by La La Land Records. Wink wink, nudge nudge, link in description. There is no better example of something that watered down and literally destroyed the integrity of the franchise than Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Since Serling wasn't able to come back for the sequel, they brought on the original writer of the book to pen the script, Pierre Boulle. I don't know if he lost his spark halfway through the movie, but this was just not it. Another issue before the movie began was that Charlton Heston, who plays Taylor, did not want to return for the sequel, and the only reason he even agreed to briefly appear is so he could donate his pay to charity, and maybe that is the only good thing to come out of this one. Now, I get I may sound dramatic, but just hear this first. The movie revolves around an entirely new character who is a carbon copy of Taylor. The exact same things happened to him in the first movie happened to this new character named Brent, and you can tell they just quickly rewrote the script and switched gears as fast as they could. Right after the events of the first movie, we are supposed to believe Taylor literally disappearing into thin air is plausible and good for the story. It's just your average run-of-the-mill disappearance, and poof, new character. Anyways, yada yada yada, I'll spare you the repetition of the first movie, which is a lot of it, I'll admit, and get to the original parts. Brent essentially travels to what's left of human civilization, which was an interesting concept, but it's quickly ruined by how horrible the reasoning behind it is. In the deep depths of the wreckage, they find a group of bald people that can speak, who, get this, have a nuclear missile god that they pray to, and then they rip their skin off, and on top of that, they have telekinetic powers. Like, what? I honestly could not think of a worse direction if I tried that adds nothing to the plot. Apparently, Taylor was captured by these mutants, and the rest of the movie is a lot of mind-numbing absurdity of them trying to escape. We have absolutely zero reason to have Brent in this story, and that is really shown with him being randomly killed off along with the rest of the characters. This movie really has nothing to say and is obviously just a cheap cash grab with a weird, bizarre gimmick that I think is relatively uninteresting. I would encourage you all to watch this to realize how bad it is, but then you would have to watch it. If the first Planet of the Apes movie was the rocket ship launching, this one is it instantly pivoting directly into the ground and then exploding into a million pieces. This isn't just the worst Planet of the Apes movie, it's probably the worst movie I've ever seen. And I've seen Fantastic! You know what people say when they walked out of Planet of the Apes? Yep, exactly what I was thinking. Telekinetic, nuclearly mutated humans who worship a missile and rip their skin off. Truly a revelation for all of storytelling. I just had to cement that. Now, the only real way to end this, and what their solution ended up being for how to end this horrible, horrible script, was to just kill everybody, just kill everyone, which I think is actually commendable. I think they were ready to call it quits, but I guess this one made money since there's another one. You might be thinking, how do you even begin to make a sequel to that? I'll tell you how. Ape Superstars. Yeah, that's right. Cornelius and Zira escaped the explosion and went back in time actually, and now they're back in the 70s. I don't know anymore. I don't really know what's going on. Another crash landing, woo. Totally not a weird cop-out at all. Even though this was a completely random, nonsensical premise, it actually worked for this one because it's actually aware of the kind of movie it is. It is a new kind of subversion with the smart apes meeting the smart humans, with both sides being unfamiliar with the other. Now, it seems the humans are aware of Taylor's journey, but we have, and drumroll please, an entirely new cast, besides Zira and Cornelius. Even though this was just another one to keep that money-making machine going, the way they changed the story was actually a lot more interesting and informative than the last one. It was a breath of fresh air, desperately needed, so yeah, far from a cash grab. Anyways, back to the premise, centering this movie purely around ape protagonists was a great move, and you can see the domino effect that had later on. The Ape Superstars. Shenanigans were fun, but the added layer of Zira's pregnancy and humanity always having one bad apple were very well explored themes. Now, I know I digged on Beneath for retreading too much, but forget it, because this one actually flips it on its head in an interesting way. Cornelius and Zira now serve the purpose of Taylor and Nova, just as the new characters Lewis Dixon and Stephanie Bratton are representative of Cornelius and Zira, shown by their kiss mimicking the original film. And of course, there's also the co-pilot Milo, who meets a violent end just like the human co-pilots before him. Then there's the character I really wanted to bring up, the human version of Dr. Zaius, known as Dr. Otto Hasslein. They are both similar in terms of ignorance to reality, but Otto manifests it in a much more vile and violent way, twisting the narrative to persecute and even attempt to kill the apes throughout. He also works to show the divide between humans, as they actually accept the apes very openly at the beginning. The actor who played him is Eric Braeden, who brings that intelligence and hatred to life. Good actor, and he was in Colossus the Forbin Project, so some brownie points there too. I was starting to wonder why that was, as obviously the movies were painting them in a negative light beforehand, but after the introduction of his character, it made sense. Of course, this ends with the whole baby swap scenario in which Otto shoots a normal baby ape while the real baby is at the zoo with the zookeeper Armando. This is followed with a very poorly edited so cringe. Hey, it's not perfect, but it's one of my favorites, so it definitely makes the top 3. Next up is Conquest for the Planet of the Apes, showing the baby ape Milo from the last movie all grown up into a teen, even though he sounds like a grown man. Wait, let's fact check that. Yeah, the actor Roddy McDowall was 43 in this movie. Eat your heart out, Tobey Maguire. It's definitely noticeable, but also it's a talking ape, so who really cares? Also, another fun fact, Roddy was in 4 of the movies and the TV series, with him being temporarily recast in Beneath because, of course, it's Beneath. First playing Cornelius and then Caesar. This one essentially explains how the world destroyed itself and apes took over, which paved the way for the original Planet of the Apes movie. But the transition isn't exactly natural. Even though Caesar being evolved made sense, the rest of the apes suddenly evolving from a disease at the exact same time was cringy, to say the least. The whole explanation that dogs and cats were wiped out, then replaced by apes, and the same disease killed one and left the others alive is just bad writing, and I can see why they ended up changing the origin in the new movies. I get the symbolism used by Milo picking the name Caesar, but him just randomly changing his name by picking it out of a book was also a little bit lazy. Now, you might be wondering, if this movie is set in 1991 and Rise of the Planet of the Apes is in 2016, then how are these set in the same universe? Long story short, they're not. They're not in the same universe. In Rise, we see the spaceships lift off with what is assumed to be Taylor, which doesn't line up since clearly he was sent off in the 70s. And it's clear they didn't see the sequels as canon, as many of the new movies contradict them. In this one, it's mentioned apes evolved after escape from the disease that killed dogs and cats, but in the newer movies, they are genetically evolved way later. So the only way the chronology kind of lines up is if you don't consider the original sequels to be canon. I do think while this version of Caesar is a far cry from the rebooted movies, the idea of building this revolution against the humans was actually the best part. It was this sort of violent uprising and call for vengeance that hasn't really been seen in the other ones in a big way. This is shown through apes becoming slaves/prisoners for the humans in some of the best lines of dialogue we've seen in this century. Or, I guess, past 2 centuries, but who's really counting?
No! Do.
I'm just kidding. But jokes aside, the psychology of going against this system that's been created to tear you down just for existing can be applied to not just animals, but also civil rights, as exemplified by Malcolm's character associating his human struggles. This revolution is very strong, and the ending with Caesar's speech has to be one of the best scenes out of all the movies, and that to me puts its points up at least a little bit. Caesar's revolution seems like a great idea, but when Malcolm says for better or worse, it makes him realize what he's planning to do is no better than the same tyrannical reign the humans have right now. It's all completely against his own self-interest, seeing the torture his brethren had to suffer through that led to wanting the humans dead, which is what makes his choice that much more impactful. His decision not to repeat the cycle of violence, but to instead continue the cycle of peace bestowed upon him by Armando is powerful, as he truly owes nothing to the humans after his death. Now, I know many people prefer the original dark ending where Caesar goes on a path to kill Breck, but I prefer the one they used in the movie. This was obviously a last-minute decision, and Caesar's lines are very badly dubbed over. Lisa saying no and Caesar flipping shows they can be better than their captors, ending the cycle of violence and letting the sun shine on both the apes and humans. And here we are. It's been a good/bad/perfect/horrible/amazing experience, and it's time for the finale. I would say I have the least to say on this one, but that actually gives me a lot to say. Battle for the Planet of the Apes certainly isn't bad. It's just held back by the lowest budget in the franchise. The budget was $1.7 million, and you might be thinking, that's a lot of money today. but today that's only $12 million. That is the same budget as 2023's Megan, for the finale of one of the biggest sci-fi franchises. And it's very, very obvious in this, even more recasting in this one, as Malcolm has been written out and replaced with his brother for some reason, which is totally less convoluted than if they wrote him out of the script. They unfortunately have repeated the same mistake they did with Brett and Beneath, and to be honest, they could have easily written around that too, instead of just writing in a character who's an exact clone. A lot of this movie is very inconsequential, focusing on the chimp versus gorilla war and the death of Caesar's son. It was interesting to see their feud, but to be honest, it didn't do much to contribute to the overarching narrative of the movies. And of course, we can't forget the human mutates from our favorite movie, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, returning. Truly a modern marvel. It is sad to see the last movie in this franchise be mostly fluff like this, but it could have been a lot worse. The only thing I find super interesting or insightful was the ending of the movie, which I think might be a little bit divisive. I've had conversations about this before, and everyone seems to think it means one thing or the other. What do I think it means? I think it means the directors know nothing about science, because why is a statue crying? That makes no sense! But it could honestly be a tear of joy seeing the apes and humans living side by side, or a tear of sadness knowing they are doomed to repeat the mistakes. I like to think it's the first one because to me it makes the most sense, but I do think they left it open-ended on purpose. It's a perfect final scene to a really random film series that resonates on a similar level to the whole franchise's philosophy. Let me know your thoughts and if you strongly disagreed with anything I said in the comments. And also let me know if you want to see a video about the new movies or something else. Anyways, thank you for watching.